There will be a vote on cuts to welfare coming up. How are your MPs going to vote?
Well, we'll look at the details of that and make our decision at the time. I haven't got that in front of me, so I can't make a judgment here live on TV, I'm afraid.
OK, Richard Tice, Deputy Leader of Reform UK, thank you very much for joining us. And just for a final word, your overall view of what you've heard today, a lot of it was expected. How do you think it's going to go down on the Labour backbenches?
I think pretty well. I think they'll be happy with what the Chancellor said in the House of Commons. I think as the reality of this document settles in, though, it might have a sort of rougher reception. The big debate about economics in the Labour Party at the moment, including among Labour MPs and including privately among some government ministers, is whether the Chancellor ought to increase taxes or change her borrowing rules in the autumn. And I don't think she's closed down that debate today at all.
OK, thank you very much indeed to Faisal and to you, Henry. That's all for today. But I'll be back with even more tomorrow from Politics Live at 12:15 here on BBC Two and on the iPlayer. Thank you very much for watching.
Live from London, this is BBC News. The UK Chancellor Rachel Reeves sets out her new plan for spending with a promise to invest in security, health and growing the economy.
In this spending review, total departmental budgets will grow by 2.3% a year in real terms. Compare that to the Conservative choice of austerity.
LA's overnight curfew has just come to an end. Police say they carried out mass arrests of those who defied it. 17 officers are injured in a second night of clashes in Ballymena in Northern Ireland following protests over an alleged sexual assault on a teenage girl. And the sun's south pole closer than we've ever seen it before. The remarkable new footage unravelling the mysteries of our closest star. Hello, I'm Anita McVeigh and welcome to Verified Live. It's a hugely significant day here in the UK as the Chancellor Rachel Reeves has been setting out how taxpayers' money will be spent by the government until the end of the decade. We're going to have lots of analysis over the coming hours. And right now, let's cross straight to my colleague, Regini Vaidyanathan, who's at Westminster for us. Regini.
Thanks very much, Anita. Well, it's been a busy day here in Westminster as the UK Chancellor Rachel Reeves delivered her spending review, which essentially sets out what spending is going to go to each government department until the end of the next decade. It's important to say that this is not about any tax-raising measures. It's all about how the existing funds are going to be distributed, and different government departments have come out better than others. Well, let's take you through some of the main points. First of all, the Chancellor confirmed that total departmental spending will grow by 2.3% over inflation per year. She said that spending on the NHS would rise by 3% a year after inflation, and she confirmed £39 billion for social and affordable housing. The Chancellor also committed to a boost in defence spending and pledged to end asylum hotels in the next 4 years. Rachel Reeves said she was rejecting austerity. Our first report comes from our political correspondent, Layla Nathu.
When will we feel better off, Chancellor?
Soon, fingers crossed, is what she's thinking.
Rachel Reeves leaving Downing Street this morning for Parliament for a crucial moment in her time in charge of the country's finances. Earlier, cabinet ministers met to hear how much money their departments have been allocated for the coming years, both for spending and investment. Some have done better than others. Trade-offs unavoidable with limited room for manoeuvre in economic terms.
I call the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rachel Reeves.
In the Commons this lunchtime, the Chancellor set out her stall.
We are renewing Britain. But I know that too many people in too many parts of our country are yet to feel it. This government's task, my task as Chancellor, and the purpose of this spending review is to change that, to ensure that renewal is felt in people's everyday lives, in their jobs and on their high streets. The priorities of this spending review are the priorities of working people.
She's giving day-to-day spending across all departments an above-inflation boost and said she was taking a different approach to that of the Tories.
In contrast to our increase of 2.3%, they cut spending by 2.9% per year in 2010. So let's be clear. Austerity was a destructive choice for the fabric of our society.
There are cuts to some departments, including Transport and the Foreign Office, but schools and defence have been given an uplift, and the NHS was the big winner.
This Labour government is making a record cash investment in our National Health Service, increasing real terms day-to-day spending by 3% per year for every single year of this spending review. An extra £29 billion per year for the day-to-day running of our health service.
The Chancellor also set out areas for longer-term investment, around £14 billion to build the Sizewell C nuclear power station in Suffolk, more than £15 billion on bus, tram and train networks in the north of England and the Midlands, £86 billion for research in the science and technology sector by the end of the Parliament, and £39 billion towards affordable homes in England.
The Chancellor is betting that voters and those within her own party who've recently questioned her judgment will be convinced by big numbers on investing for the longer term in the hope of generating growth over time. There is more spending money in some priority areas, but these are a delicate set of decisions that Rachel Reeves knows will define what this Labour government can do.
Opposition parties gave their response to the Chancellor's announcement.
This is the spend now, tax later review. Because the Right Honourable Lady knows she will need to come back here in the autumn with yet more taxes. And a cruel summer of speculation awaits.
We are still not seeing the scale of ambition needed to turn the country around. We welcome the announcement of investment in the NHS, but on its own, it won't work unless the government invests in social care too.
Rachel Reeves and her Treasury team are telling us what the state will provide under Labour and how much that will cost. Big choices that they say marks a new phase of this government. Leila Nathu, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, in many ways, what we heard from the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, was not surprising. Many of the announcements have been heavily trailed in the weeks and days before. But let's break some of it down nonetheless with our economics correspondent, Andy Verity. So, Andy, things like a boost in defence spending, a boost in NHS, even the Home Office not doing as well as some of the other departments. We expected a lot of that. It had already been trailed. What surprises were there, if any, then?
Well, I think there were nuances really. So you had a slightly higher real terms increase in overall departmental spending than we thought there'd be. 2.3% was slightly more than most people expected. And there were other things like, for example, the effect on households of the various changes. So I've just got some new analysis through which shows that if you're in the bottom half of the income distribution, so the bottom half of the population by income, then you tend to have benefited to the tune of about £1,200 a year from the increases to public services, the boost to public services, but lost to the tune of about £400 or £500 a year from higher taxes or reduced benefits, like, for example, the withdrawal from some people at least of the winter fuel payment. If you're in the top 10th, those in a traditional Labour way are the people who've been hit hardest. So in a way this is quite interesting how traditional Labour have been in who they've hit. So according to the Treasury's own model, and we should say it's a Treasury's model, The wealthiest will benefit from better public services to the tune of about £700 to £750 a year, but they'll lose to the tune of more than £1,000 a year from changes to benefits and taxes.
OK, so that analysis just coming in there, Andy. There's a lot to get through, but we've been looking at questions that the audience wants answers to, and I've just been casting an eye over them. And something that a lot of people have been searching about today, we may as well get this one out of the way because it sort of underpins all of what we're doing, is a lot of people are asking, what is the spending review?
What is the spending? A good question. You know, what's the difference between that and a budget and an autumn statement? Well, normally you have two what we call fiscal events where they make spending and tax decisions a year. And actually, there's only supposed to be one now, the budget, which happens in the autumn where you get tax decisions being made. This is about spending, not tax. So no decisions here to raise taxes or cut taxes. It's about a strategic thing. It's more of a medium to long-term view, setting out the government spending plans over the rest of the Parliament rather than just in the coming year. So that's the big difference.
And you're economics correspondent, but economics and politics are always intertwined, especially when we're standing in front of that building, Andy. How much of this matches up to what the Labour Party during the election was promising?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, certainly they've promised to boost spending in real terms on health, and that's what they're doing here, by some 2.8%. And that, unfortunately, is at the expense of boosting spending by substantial amounts on other departments. So although you're getting an uplift in defence of about 0.7% per year over the course of the next Parliament, other departments like the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs are seeing their budgets fall. Now, of course, that wasn't something that was promised in the manifesto. And what you constantly have here is a trade-off between political costs and benefits and economic costs and benefits. So with the winter fuel payment, for example, that was only £1.2 billion to fix it. And I think eventually the government's clearly taken the view that the political costs they were paying, the price they were paying there, wasn't worth it for the saving that they would make. And it was better just to rescind 3/4 of it and make do without £1.2 billion, and a lot of their supporters are a lot happier.
Let's pick up on that. You say, for example, with the winter fuel U-turn, relatively speaking, it was a small amount of money when you look at government budget. So let's just break down, say, defence and health. Are they getting huge boosts?
Well, I mean, it's a substantial boost for health. It's going up from about 180-something billion now to more than 200 billion in the current financial year, and it will go up by more than inflation in each of the coming years. So yes, it is a substantial boost, but on the other hand, compare it to what it was, say, in the so-called austerity decade, when in fact health spending went up by about 3 or 4% each year, and it's actually a bit less.
OK. Andy, you'll be with us throughout the course of the afternoon. Thank you very much for answering questions, basic and complicated. We appreciate it, and we'll be back with you in a moment. So let's go from our economics correspondent to our political correspondent, Alex Forsyth, who's in the building behind me, in the thick of it in Central Lobby. So, Alex, just tell us what the reaction is from politicians where you are.
Well, it's interesting because it's, as you said, a lot of this we actually knew about in advance, because in the week or so in the run-up to today's spending review, we've had that drip of announcements about the things that the government wanted to get out there in the public. So the details about investment in public transport, it details about investment in that big nuclear programme and the new nuclear plant Sizewell C. And then, of course, this morning we heard about that investment in affordable and social housing. So some of the really big ticket items in this spending review were out in advance. But I think what has developed through the course of the day, and after we heard Rachel Reeves give her speech on her feet in this building, was the story that the government is attempting to tell. And that was really a little bit, we've taken the difficult decisions to allow us to do what we're doing now, and we think this is going to make things better. That is really the government's argument. And as you were discussing there with Andy Verity, some of this is much more about longer term investment in projects like roads and buildings that might take a while to come to fruition, but the government thinks that's the right approach and that that's going to get the economy growing. But then there are those questions about when you really dig into the detail of the day-to-day spending, what this means for some government departments and whether some areas of spending are going to really be squeezed, and then the question about the impact that might have on public services. Now, the Conservatives' response, the Shadow Chancellor Mel Stride was on his feet just after Rachel Reeves, and what he was saying was that the government is borrowing, because it is borrowing to fund some of the investment spending that it's outlined, and raising that question mark about whether or not there could be tax rises when the Chancellor comes back in the autumn for her budget, the big fiscal event of the year. Now, the government, of course, hasn't said that it's going to put taxes up come the budget, but it is the question that the Conservatives are posing, and I think that is increasingly going to become an attack line from them.
Now, Alex, I put Andy on the spot a little bit by going through some of the questions that our audience are asking in the aftermath of the spending review. I hope you don't mind, I'm going to do the same. A lot of people are asking, quite simply, what is austerity? Can you explain to our viewers what it is? Because we heard Mel Stride talking about austerity, we heard the Chancellor talking about austerity. Of course, it's a bit of a political football, isn't it?
Yeah, and it is a term that is often used to describe the period of time from 2010 onwards, when David Cameron and George Osborne, cast your mind back to them when they were Prime Minister and Chancellor, when they came into government and they said we have to really rein in public spending. And that did see some areas, particularly places like local councils, see their budgets cut. That is what is often pointed to as the period of austerity. Now, there's been a question mark, particularly from Labour backbench MPs, about whether or not this government, the Labour government, and the choices that it was going to make when it came to spending would effectively amount to another period of austerity, where the government departments seeing budgets shrink, and that therefore had an impact on the public services that people and communities rely on. It was really notable that Rachel Reeves, in her speech today, she said austerity was destructive and she wasn't going back there. And then she outlined all of the areas that this government was spending money on. And as Andy Verity was explaining, it is right to say that overall government spending is going up. But I come back to that point. You have to break it down and really dig in the detail, which our team of experts are doing throughout the course of the afternoon, and they'll get all the details up on the BBC News website. But that is where we will really learn about the impact on specific government departments and the consequences for public services.
Indeed, Alex. One more with you as our political expert. I touched on it with Andy, but of course, how much does this marry up with Labour's manifesto promises in the election last year?
Well, this government has said that it is mission-driven, to use the lingo of some of ministers. And what you heard today from the Chancellor were a couple of areas where they are really choosing to focus. She repeated them time and time again during the course of the speech that she gave. And they were about security, health, and economic growth. And what she was trying to say with the decisions that they were making were focused on those areas, which is why we saw an increase in health spending and defence spending. And then we saw those investment decisions she made, with the government claims is going to help get the economy moving, which is a real focus for them, because they argue that if you do that, then ultimately you end up with more money for public services in the long term. So I think that framing is really interesting, because we can see now where the government's focus is. It is a simple statement and perhaps an obvious one to say, but what really matters is whether it works.
Indeed, only time will tell. I'm using a cliche there, but it's a useful one. Thank you very much, Alex Forsyth, joining us from Central Lobby. Alex is just in the building behind me. We'll be back with Alex throughout the course of the afternoon. Well, let's drill down on one particular area, because of course there's so many different government departments who have been impacted. There have been winners. We talked about defence and health, the two of the bigger winners, and there have been departments that have lost out a little bit. Home Office, for example, and the Foreign Office, who didn't get an increase in their budgets, akin to what we saw with the NHS, for example. Well, now let's take a closer look at education. I'm joined now on the line by Daniel Kabede, the General Secretary of the National Education Union. Welcome to BBC News, Daniel. We heard a range of announcements, investment in apprenticeships, for example. Of course, we heard the announcement earlier in the week about free school meals. Just take us through what you think are the most significant for education from what we heard from the Chancellor.
So we really applaud and welcome the Chancellor's decision to extend free school meals to all children in receipt of universal credit. That will make a material difference. We're pleased to see £2 billion to be devoted to school buildings. And we are heartened to see an end to austerity in education, but it is just a modest increase. I think we have to be realistic about what the Chancellor is committed to in terms of education spending. It's dependent on the OBR's predictions for inflation and for wage growth remaining true. And of course, those have been very turbulent in recent years, but it will return school spending power back to levels when Boris Johnson left office, not to the 2010 levels that we desperately need to see in education. You know, we still have a very deep crisis in education in terms of recruitment and retention. We've got the largest class sizes in Europe currently. So whilst we are pleased to see an increase in school spending, we do still have some concerns about whether it does go far enough, considering what we are dealing with in education today.
You talk about recruitment and retention. I'm just going to pick up on one announcement from the Chancellor saying an extra £615 million this year to partially fund a 4% pay rise for teachers in England, with schools expected to fund a quarter of the rise through, I quote, improved productivity. What did you make of that?
Well, it's very difficult because after 14 years of Conservative austerity, no school leader or teacher can identify cuts to be made in schools. Now, that's not to say that there aren't system-wide efficiencies to be found because of academisation and privatisation of education. These things have been incredibly wasteful. We can have a cap on excessive CEO pay, for example, a national energy contract. We can move away from supply agencies towards supply pools. These things would be system-wide efficiencies that we can find. But school-based ones, it's incredibly difficult. I mean, what we have noticed around the spending review is that the funding increases will be front-loaded. So whilst there is going to be some efficiencies to be found in schools this year, it looks like that you know, in 25, 26, it will be much better. 26, 27, sorry, much better. But yes, overall, we still are in a remit where we need to see much greater investment in education.
OK, Daniel Kavadi, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts on the area of education. Well, throughout the course of the day, we will, of course, be taking a closer look at some of the key government departments to see how their spending plans have fared in today's announcement. And more crucially, we will get some analysis, because in a short moment I will be joined by Paul Johnson of the IFS. Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News. Welcome back to our live coverage of the UK Chancellor's spending review, where the government's outlined the choices it's made about where to allocate cash over the next 3 years. In its spending review, well, the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, has promised to invest in security, health and in growing Britain's economy. Now, there have been some departments who've done very well out of this, the NHS, for example, and defence. Others, like the Home Office and the Foreign Office, haven't come out as well as they have, for example. But we're going to break it all down now. Joining me now is Paul Johnson, the Director of the Institute for Fiscal Studies, the IFS. And anyone who follows economics knows that after something like this, this is the post-match analysis you want. You want Paul, and we've got Paul. So, Paul, first of all, your 30-second take.
It's pretty much what we expected. The NHS gets quite a lot, 3% a year, year-on-year growth. But that means there's not much left to share among everybody else. And that's why we've got a number of departments, Department for Environment, for example, seeing cuts over the next 3 years. The schools budget actually looks pretty tight to me, I have to say. The Ministry of Defence budget is sticking at 2.5% of national income after 2027. I think there's going to be pressure to increase that further over that period. And then, of course, what we heard from Rachel Reeves was announcement after announcement after announcement about the money that she's going to spend on capital projects, energy projects, rail projects, and so on. A lot of that money already allocated over the last couple of years, and quite a lot to come.
One thing that I think some of our viewers might want to know is, so we know this is not about raising money, this is about how to allocate the funds that are already there. How much can those funds change according to the political situation globally? So there's forecasts that have been made, but for example, we don't know what's happening with the president in the US and tariffs. So could that change the calculations?
It certainly could. There's a lot of uncertainty in the world economy at the moment, and the Chancellor, she says her own fiscal rules, she says they're ironclad, she won't deviate from them. Well, the problem there is with that level of economic uncertainty and the fact that she's barely meeting her rules by the smallest amount it's possible to meet them, actually. That means any change for the negative in the forecasts will throw her off course, and that will mean, if that happens in the budget, I think the only thing that they can then give is more tax rises. And I'm not saying that's inevitable in any sense, but I think there's a 50-50 shot at least that we'll get tax rises in the budget in order to pay for all this.
Tariff turmoil could equal tax, but who knows?
Combination of tariff turmoil and the fact that interest rates on government debt are increasing, and actually the fact that the forecasts back in the spring were pretty optimistic.
Okay, let me just ask you about something you just referred to there, Rachel Reeves's fiscal rules. For those of us who don't live and breathe economics like you, in 30 seconds, what are her fiscal rules?
Well, she's got two of them. One is that looking forward, she should be borrowing only to invest. In other words, she can borrow for the capital project she's talking about, but not for day-to-day spending. She's meeting that, as I say, by the tiniest imaginable margin. So any slight change and she starts to miss that. And the other rule is that on a particular definition of debt, and a very generous one to her, debt should be falling at the end of the Parliament as a fraction of national income. Debt is very high at the moment. We're paying an enormous amount of interest on that debt. And again, it is barely falling at the end of the Parliament. So that's why I say any changes to the economic outlook for the negative, and she starts to miss those rules.
So not that much room for manoeuvre?
I mean, no room for manoeuvre.
No room for manoeuvre, okay.
Zero.
Another question, some people have been talking about the word austerity. We were discussing that with our political correspondent Alex Forsyth. There are some people who would argue that she's just spending too much. She'd argue that's to boost investment and growth.
Yeah, well, we're certainly not in a world of austerity. Spending went up a lot last year, particularly, and through this year, and she talked a lot about the additional spending over this Parliament, but it's worth saying the countervailing part of that is a lot more borrowing than was in the plans a year ago, and also significantly more tax. So this government has decided to focus on particularly that capital side of spending, and they're willing to borrow quite a lot more in order to fund it.
Okay, Paul Johnson, thank you very much for taking us through so much, very succinctly. It's always great to have Paul and his analysis on a day like this. Well, if you're watching here in the UK at 5:30, we will be joined by a number of more experts, I should say, for a special Your Voice, Your BBC, to answer any questions you might have about the spending review. Get in touch with us, email bbcyourvoice@bbc.co.uk, or you can send us a WhatsApp 07756 165 803. That's it for the moment here from College Green. I'm Regina Vaidyanathan. Stay with us.
Hello there. Warm and humid is the forecast for the next few days for all areas, but particularly so for England and Wales. But this combination of heat and humidity is likely to set off some heavy and thundery downpours, which will be pushing up from the south. Now, we've got high pressure over the near continent drawing this warm and humid air from France, and low pressure, it's weather fronts out in the Atlantic trying to make inroads and destabilising the atmosphere. So tonight most places will be dry, warm and muggy. We'll start to see some heavy showers and thunderstorms pushing up across the Channel Islands into southwest England and South Wales. Some of these could be heavy, risk of some localised flooding. Double figure values for all. So we start Thursday off on a warm and humid note. We'll have showers and thunderstorms from the word go across southwest England. These pushing into Wales, Northern Ireland, southwest Scotland as we head into the afternoon. And again, some of them could be heavy with the risk of some localised flooding. But elsewhere, it stays dry and sunny with some variable cloud Top temperatures again around the mid-20s and feeling humid. Friday, probably the peak of the heat, especially the southeast of England. We'll see some sunshine here, scattered thundery downpours developing pretty widely, spreading their way northwards through the course of the day. Top temperatures, high 20s in the southeast. We could hit the 30 Celsius mark, low 20s further north and west. But as we head into the weekend, the Atlantic winds out, it turns cooler and fresher with temperatures returning closer to the seasonal norm. Showers in the north, sunnier in the south.
This is better known to you and me as a flying car.
This is not your typical farm. It's food of the future.
A highly secure facility that monitors foreign governments' attempts to destabilise democracy.
Why are we so suited and booted for this task?
The idea is to learn more about how volcanoes behave so that we can better predict eruptions.
This is a prime location for big companies to show us their latest products.
I'm going to go in and have a look. Using technology, distribution is now 98% efficient.
This is the potential of electric power in the marine industry. Can we fire it up?
Once we close the doors behind us, no one can hear you scream.
I better not touch it anymore. This is one of the most incredible things I've ever done.
I'm exhausted.
Yeah.
Tech Now. Watch on BBC iPlayer.
This programme asks plain questions with the help of the unrivalled range of BBC journalists right across the world. And gathered here in this building, I'll also draw on my frontline experience that helps me know who to talk to and who to listen to. Meaning our analysis is objective, unbiased, and I promise you with absolutely no spin. That's why we call our programme Unspun World.
Watch on BBC iPlayer.
What does it take to become a top opera star?
I'm on a mission to find out how opera is trying to attract new audiences and reinvent itself.
A lot of people find crossing the threshold of an opera house quite difficult.
It's very, very important that we expose our young talent to the best that the business has to offer.
That's Take Me to the Opera with me, Zainab Badawi. Watch on iPlayer.
This is BBC News, the headlines for you. The UK Chancellor Rachel Reeves sets out her new plan for spending with a promise to invest in security, health and growing the economy. LA emerges from a partial curfew. The US Marines are staged to respond to further protests amid President Trump's crackdown on immigration. Donald Trump says America's trade deal with China is done, claiming the relationship between the two countries is excellent. 17 officers are injured in a second night of clashes in Ballymena in Northern Ireland following protests over an alleged sexual assault on a teenage girl. And the sun's south pole closer than we've ever seen before. The remarkable new footage unravelling the mysteries of our closest star. Hello, I'm Anita McVeigh and you're with Verified Live on BBC News. Now with all the latest sports news, here's Tanya Arnold. Over to you, Tanya.
Anita, thanks very much indeed. We will start with the cricket where the World Test Championship final between Australia and South Africa is well underway at Lord's in London. South Africa won the toss earlier and chose to bowl in overcast conditions, and it was a very good decision. They picked off early wickets. Kagiso Rabada and Marco Jansen have 2 apiece, but Steve Smith stabilised the innings before going for 66. Bo Webster then picked up the baton. He's on 55 with Australia, currently 190 for 5 at tea. Manchester City completed the signing of AC Milan midfielder Tijani Reinders in time for the Club World Cup. They paid an initial fee of £46.5 million for the Dutch international, who signed a 5-year deal. He's Pep Guardiola's third major summer signing after the arrivals of Ryan Aït-Nouri and Ryan Cherki. The scheduling of women's matches is a systematic issue across top-level tennis, according to the head of the women's tour, Portia Archer. Her comments follow criticism of the French Open organisers, who featured no women's matches in any of the 11 prime-time night sessions on their main court this year.
I think it's a missed opportunity. I think that fans expect, and I think increasingly we'll see that they demand, that they have the opportunity to see the best tennis matches, whether they're men or women, in primetime slots. I think it's sort of broader than that. I think it's more foundational and more systemic. So I don't really think about, an individual making the choice. It's probably not that simple.
The third golf major of the year starts on Thursday with the US Open at Oakmont Country Club in Pittsburgh. The course is renowned as one of the toughest there is, and the players know they're in for a tricky few days.
I kind of equate some of the major tests to, like the majors in tennis, you're playing on a different surface. Like you got grass, clay, and then a hard court, and it's a different style of game. And the U.S. Open compared to the Masters is a completely different type of test. I think in the Masters you have a lot more shot making when you get around the greens, because it's a lot of fairway, there's pine straw, there's not really the rough factor. And then when you get here, it's a lot of hacking out of the rough. Both of them are fantastic tests. This is probably the hardest golf course that we'll play maybe ever.
Well, staying in Pittsburgh, where new Steelers quarterback Aaron Rodgers marked his first day with the team. The NFL's 4-time most valuable player spent months contemplating his future before deciding to sign a 1-year deal with the Steelers. The 2011 Super Bowl winner will also be looking to add another ring to his collection, having also revealed on his first day that he secretly got married a couple of months ago. Game 3 of the NBA Finals between the Oklahoma City Thunder and Indiana Pacers takes place later. The Finals moves to Indianapolis after a win apiece in the opening 2 games in Oklahoma City. And the Thunder are looking to continue the momentum shift, having comprehensively won Game 2 on Sunday.
We just have to keep finding ways to get better as a group. If we continue to do that, we'll be just fine. But if we've struggled in an area, that's an area we can get better at, and we have to attack that opportunity. And I think Game 3 is a perfect example of that.
There's a lot of things we have to do better. We realize that. I think we've lost, at least by the scoreboard, 6 out of 8 or 7 out of 8 quarters. And so we're playing a great team, and so we've got to make adjustments. And we got to play better.
And the cricket is just back underway at Lord's. You can follow that on the BBC Sport website and app. But that is all your sport for now, Anita.
Tanya, thank you very much. To the US now, and an overnight curfew, which has been in force in Los Angeles since 8 p.m. local time on Tuesday, has ended. Police had issued dispersal orders and say they made mass arrests after 5 successive days of protest. Despite opposition from California's governor and other officials in LA, President Trump deployed the National Guard and has also sent Marines to the city, although they currently remain at a staging area, not on the streets. The White House says the extra force is needed to protect border control agents as they carry out immigration raids. There have also been protests and clashes in New York. Well, CBS News correspondent Jared Hill, who's in New York, told us more about the situation across the country.
Lucy, we've seen these demonstrations happening in New York, in Chicago, as well as parts of Texas, Washington, D.C., California, obviously multiple of those. Here in New York yesterday, there were hundreds of people, if not somewhere close to 1,000, who were protesting really in one particular part of the city. I think that's one of the things that's important to keep in mind here with all of these protests that we're seeing, is that largely they are pretty isolated to specific parts of these cities. There were a couple of dozen arrests yesterday yesterday here in New York, mostly related to things like disorderly conduct. There is another protest scheduled for today here in New York as well. One of the big questions, obviously, is going to be how long does this last? How much do we continue to see these protests around this specific issue? There have obviously been constant protests ever since President Trump took office, and this is the latest powder keg.
Jared Hill. And in the last few minutes, we've been hearing from the UN Human Rights Chief, who today says he has serious concerns about the way deportations are being carried out in the United States. Speaking to journalists in Geneva, Volker Turk said deportations must ensure the dignity of each and every person. He said it requires respect for international human rights law and international refugee law. Mr. Turk also said that the right to peaceful assembly needs to be guaranteed, and that dispersal of protesters by police should respect international human rights norms. And more now on the breaking news from the last couple of hours that President Trump has said a US deal with China is done, with Beijing to supply magnets and rare earth minerals, while the US will allow Chinese students in its colleges and universities. It follows trade talks between the two countries in London. On his Truth Social platform, President Trump said, "We are getting a total of 55% tariffs. China is getting 10%. Relationship is excellent." Our business correspondent, Michelle Fleury, has more on these developments.
So I think there'd been a lot of sort of question marks about what was going to come out of these talks. Then you started to hear that they were going well, that there was a framework in place. Donald Trump seeming to confirm all of that, basically just posting on his social media channel that there is a deal with China done. He says it is still subject to approval by himself and also Xi Jinping of China. He says that we will get full magnets and any necessary rare earths will be supplied up front by China. And he says in return, China will also be able to send its students to United States colleges and universities. There is also some talk about tariffs, the tariff rate that may be in place. But again, we're still waiting for the final actual details. And I think that's important to remember, that this is really just confirming that there is a framework in place, that there has been progress made. But the fine print is really what everyone wants to see. One of the key sticking points, Lucy, had been this idea about export controls over rare earths from China. These are crucial metals that are essential to so much of modern day manufacturing and also defense. For example, there had been reports that car companies were having difficulties getting the magnets they need for electric vehicles. There was a case where Ford had to temporarily shut down manufacturing because they were kind of short on supplies. So it does appear that there has been progress made on that front.
Michelle Fleury in New York. More now on the Chancellor's spending review here in the UK, where the government has outlined the choices it has made about where to allocate cash over the next 3 years. Rachel Reeves says she has made tough decisions on how much government departments can spend on public services. BBC Verify's Ben Shue looks at the winners and losers.
Who are the departmental winners and losers from the government's spending review? Let's go through the winners first. This shows the average real growth rate in day-to-day spending for each department in the 3 years to 2028-29. That's the period in which money has been allocated in this spending review. Health and social care, as expected, is a relative winner, with spending going up by 2.8% per year. Education rises by 0.7% per year. Defence, again, as expected, also gets 0.7% per year, part of that pledge to get spending to 2.5% of GDP by 2027, although most of its spending uplift is from investment in defence kit, which isn't part of these figures. Justice, which covers courts and prisons, is up 1.8%, which will be a relief for a department which was not previously protected. But because health and defence are both big spending departments, if they get a rise, others inevitably get less, given the limited size of the pot. So let's look at some of those who have lost out. First, environment gets a 2.7% a year cut, and transport gets a 5% a year cut. MHCLG, the Housing, Communities and Local Government Department, that's Angela Rayner's department, gets a 1.4% a year cut. Now, to be clear, this is showing budgets for the day-to-day running costs of these departments. Some who list here will be doing better when it comes to their allocated capital infrastructure budgets. For instance, Angela Rayner will have more to spend on social housing. Yet, as expected, some tough choices have been made on day-to-day spending. Choices which tell us something important about this government's priorities.
Ben Shu there from BBC Verify. A minute's silence has been observed earlier today in Austria following the school gun attack in Graz. A lone gunman shot dead 10 people before killing himself. Earlier, police said he left a farewell letter and what they described as a non-functioning pipe bomb at his home before carrying out the attack. The incident is the deadliest gun attack in the country's recent history, and Austria has declared 3 days of national mourning. Bethany Bell reports.
A minute of mourning across Austria. Church bells rang out for the victims of the school shooting in Graz, the worst gun attack in this country's recent history. It happened yesterday at this school during morning classes. Gunshots broke out. A 21-year-old Austrian man, armed with 2 weapons, moved through the school, shooting as he went. The suspect, who's believed to have acted alone, killed himself in a school bathroom. Outside the school today, people gathered to remember the dead and the injured. There's grief and tears.
It's a surreal situation, and all of us are not quite sure how to deal with it.
Marie-Christine's 16-year-old daughter goes to the school. She survived the attack.
So far, she is very composed, but I think she is still in shock. I think it would be important that more children are led in violence prevention, communication that has not happened so far.
Ilse told us she heard the gunshots.
Ich wohne hier und habe das vom ersten Schuss weg mitgehört.
I live here and heard the first shot and experienced it unfold, listening as the children cried.
The Red Cross has put up this screen to allow people a moment of private grief. There's a real sense of sadness and shock here. People are still struggling to understand how such an attack is possible in this country.
Volunteers from the emergency services remain in place near the school to help the grieving.
Es ist auf jeden Fall wichtig, ein gut geschultes Team haben, auf was man sich verlassen kann.
It's important to have a good team that you can rely on. All of my colleagues in this team are educated in finding the right things to say, even when there aren't the right words.
A debate has begun about whether Austria's gun laws need to be tightened. But for the mourners here, that has come too late.
Bethany Bell with that report. Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News.
Disinformation.
There is no climate change.
You think you're winning.
The pandemic wasn't real.
Fooling people in the most sophisticated ways.
The Met Police. Social media posts.
You fueled hate and confusion. And you make our job seem almost impossible.
Fake news.
Almost. You see, it's because of you we get up in the morning and work through the night, all over the world. The more you try to drown out reality, the harder we'll work to verify the facts. We will find your sleights of hand and expose them. So no matter how hard it gets, we'll never give up. We'll be watching. We'll be ready. It's the pursuit of truth that gives us our calling. The fight for truth is on.
Ministers are calling for calm after a second night of violent protests in Ballymena in County Antrim, following a protest over an alleged sexual assault. More than 30 police officers have been injured during the unrest, and a number of people have been arrested on suspicion of riotous behaviour. Petrol bombs and bricks were thrown at police during the disturbances, with officers firing plastic baton rounds in response.
Burning cars, chaotic streets and attacks on homes for a second night in a row. In this part of Ballymena, a crowd attacked police for several hours. 17 officers were injured. Some needed to be treated in hospital.
It is absolutely vital that the PSNI are given the time they need to investigate the incidents,
concerned rather than face mindless attacks as they seek to bring peace and order to keep people safe.
Police deployed a water cannon and fired baton rounds to try to disperse the mob. They arrested 5 people. The situation calmed down around 1 o'clock in the morning, but some fires remained alight until daybreak. Well, looking around you, you can see that rioters have basically attacked police with anything they could get their hands on, bricks, bottles, even street bollards. Council workers are now starting the clean-up, doing their best to get the streets looking normal again as soon as possible, but it's a big job. There's an increasing sense of fear amongst residents from a migrant background. Some people have put signs in their windows to indicate their nationalities in the hope this will prevent their homes from being attacked. The trouble in Ballymena began on Monday night. Hundreds attended a peaceful march protesting against the alleged attempted rape of a teenage girl at the weekend. 2 14-year-old boys were charged with that offence. In court, they spoke in Romanian through an interpreter, and their solicitor said they deny the charges. Police said a group broke away from the demonstration, and some were intent on violence. The power-sharing devolved government has issued a statement. Ministers say those weaponising the situation in order to sow racial tensions don't care about seeing justice and have nothing to offer their communities but division and disorder. They go on, there can never be any justification for the violence that has taken place in recent days, during which residents have been terrorised and numerous police officers injured. The Police Service of Northern Ireland is asking other forces in the UK for backup in case the disturbances get worse. Chris Page, BBC News, Ballymena.
Yes, our Ireland correspondent Chris Page there. And we can join Chris live now in Ballymena for us. Chris, hello to you. What are the latest updates you have on the situation in the town?
Well, at the moment, Anita, it feels relatively calm, though there are certainly signs of last night's trouble pretty much everywhere, certainly in this area, just in the street across from here, Clavin Terrace. Well, you can see many houses have got their windows and doors boarded up. That's because they were smashed in over the last 2 nights. Several houses were set on fire too, and even today we have had more families with a migrant background leaving. Just a couple of hours ago there was a family packing their bags into the boot of their car in a neighbouring street. And of course police are asking for more support. They say they're deploying more resources, not just here but across Northern Ireland now, on the lookout should this trouble turn even more serious. There has been more political messages today also. It's a power-sharing devolved government here made up of 4 parties, and the head of that coalition, Michelle O'Neill, the First Minister of Sinn Féin, and Emma Little-Pengelly, the Deputy First Minister from the Democratic Unionist Party, they've given a joint news conference, and Ms O'Neill said that the violence was abhorrent, it had to stop, and Ms Little-Pengelly said that violence is always unacceptable. So politicians, community leaders and of course the police, the likes of the Northern Ireland Chief Constable John Boucher, who has said this violence is mindless, they are trying to put on a united front, as it were. They're trying to get a consistent message out there that this is achieving nothing. But the question is, will the people who've been behind this disorder listen to that? And certainly people here have not a small degree of concern that tonight could bring further trouble.
Chris, thank you very much. Chris Page, our Ireland correspondent there for us. Health officials in Gaza say at least 30 people have been killed in the latest shootings related to aid distribution. The director of the Al-Shifa hospital in Gaza City said at least 20 people had been killed trying to reach aid convoys carrying flour. The Israeli military hasn't commented yet. Our correspondent Hugo Bechega has more.
Even though we've seen that the Israeli authorities have eased this blockade on the distribution of aid, many in Gaza remain in desperate need of aid. And we've seen that since there has been this new mechanism for the distribution of aid, almost every day there have been deadly incidents around these hubs. So today we're talking about 3 separate incidents. There have been, shootings near an aid convoy carrying carrying flour, and also near one of those distribution sites of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which is this new mechanism backed by Israel and the US for the distribution of aid. We had a statement moments ago by the Israeli military. They said they were investigating those reports. But again, what the authorities in Gaza are saying is that since this new mechanism came into effect 2 weeks ago, more than 160 Palestinians have been killed trying to get aid. This is a new system that has been heavily criticized by the United Nations, by aid organizations, by virtually everyone who has some experience in aid distribution, because it requires people to go to these hubs in Gaza to be given, a very limited amount of aid. So the UN has refused to cooperate with this system. It has described this new mechanism as insufficient. It says that the amount of aid that is being handed out in Gaza remains very, very low, and this is a system that has also been described as inhumane.
Hugo Bachega. The European Space Agency has released never-before-seen video and images of the Sun. The ESA's Solar Orbiter spacecraft has sent back the first pictures of the solar South Pole. The new images are important because they'll enable scientists to get a better picture of why the Sun's poles switch from north to south and back again every 11 years, and how this affects life on Earth. Here's our science correspondent, Palab Ghosh.
A view of the Sun that's never been seen before, its South Pole. The shimmering bright atmosphere is its hottest part at 1,000,000 degrees Celsius. The darker, lofted clouds are cooler wisps of gas, but still at a searing several thousand degrees. The pictures have been taken by the European Space Agency's Solar Orbiter spacecraft. They're the closest and most detailed ever taken, and they'll help scientists learn how the star that gives us life on Earth actually works.
So this is humanity's first ever glimpse of the poles of the Sun. And this is really important because the Sun's magnetic field has an 11-year cycle where it starts off at north-south and then flips to south-north. And to really understand this cycle, what we've been missing and what we're going to get now is images of the magnetic field at the poles of the Sun.
From Earth, the Sun seems like a bright, featureless disk. But at certain frequencies, space telescopes can reveal its detailed structure, how magnetic fields twist and turn on its surface to create solar flares and loops of gas. No one really knows how these magnetic fields work because scientists are unable to see how they move and shift on the North and South poles. But now they can.
You see these radial structures, that's what you'll see more at the poles.
It's these magnetic fields that determine when the Sun rages and spits out particles towards the Earth. This space weather can damage communication satellites and power grids and cause beautiful auroras.
The reversal of the polar magnetic fields on the Sun is, for me, I think, one of the big open questions in science. And what we'll be able to do with Solar Orbiter is measure for the first time really important fluid flows that grab pieces of the magnetic field of the Sun and transport them to the polar regions.
The new research will help scientists learn more about our closest star and predict its raging moods. Palab Ghosh, BBC News.
Now, coming up for you, more on the big political developments here in the UK with the Chancellor's spending review. If you're watching in the UK at 5:30, we'll be joined by a number of experts for a special Your Voice, Your BBC to answer any questions you have about that spending review. So get in touch by emailing bbcyourvoice@bbc.co.uk, or you can also WhatsApp on 07756 165 803. And a reminder, on the BBC website and app, you can see lots more detail about the spending review announcements, what they mean for various sectors, what they mean for you. So do stay with us here on BBC News for that and all of the rest of the day's main news.
Hello there. Warm and humid is the forecast for the next few days for all areas, but particularly so for England and Wales. But this combination of heat and humidity is likely to set off some heavy and thundery downpours, which will be pushing up from the south. Now, we've got high pressure over the near continent drawing this warm and humid air from France, and low pressure, it's weather fronts out in the Atlantic trying to make inroads and destabilising the atmosphere. So tonight most places will be dry, warm and muggy. We'll start to see some heavy showers and thunderstorms pushing up across the Channel Islands into southwest England and South Wales. Some of these could be heavy, risk of some localised flooding. Double figure values for all. So we start Thursday off on a warm and humid note. We'll have showers and thunderstorms from the word go across southwest England. These pushing into Wales, Northern Ireland, southwest Scotland as we head into the afternoon. And again, some of them could be heavy with a risk of some localised flooding. But elsewhere, it stays dry and sunny with some variable cloud. Top temperatures again around the mid-20s and feeling humid. Friday, probably the peak of the heat, especially the southeast of England. We'll see some sunshine here, scattered thundery downpours developing pretty widely, spreading their way northwards through the course of the day. Top temperatures, high 20s in the southeast. We could hit the 30 Celsius mark, low 20s further north and west. But as we head into the weekend, the Atlantic winds out, it turns cooler and fresher with temperatures returning closer to the seasonal norm. Showers in the north, sunnier in the south.
Little bit of onion. Thanks so much. It smells fantastic.
It's feeding time at the Liberty Sanctuary.
Sometimes I don't know where to find all this food. Sometimes in the evening I pray, what shall I give tomorrow?
Welcome to Hokkaido.
Thank you. This looks incredible. I had no idea they were so big. So this behind us is what this is going to become.
Yes, it's like the most exciting festival that happens in this region.
Here in the Maldives, sandbanks like this appear and disappear. They constantly change size and shape according to the seasons and the ocean's forces. And that really influences the way that the people live and adapt.
Inspiring travel. Watch now on iPlayer.
Thelma Schoonmaker. Now, Rogers, Salman Rushdie, welcome to This Cultural Life. Some of the world's leading artistic figures reveal to me their influences.
This is what we call fiction. You start from a real source and you reimagine it.
And the experiences that have inspired their own work.
Being an editor is one of the most creative jobs you could ever have in the world.
For a fascinating insight into what fires the creative imagination, join me, John Wilson, for This Cultural Life. Watch on iPlayer.
Ready for a lively debate? Sometimes our panelists agree, and sometimes they don't. There's people with a lot to say, and others who just say enough. Some who want to ask the hard questions, some who want to avoid them, and some who think they have the answers. They're guaranteed to keep you entertained, whether you agree or not. Politics Live, tomorrow at 12:15 on BBC Two and iPlayer.
Live from London, this is BBC News. The UK Chancellor Rachel Reeves sets out her new plan for spending with a promise to invest in security, health and growing the economy.
In this spending review, total departmental budgets will grow by 2.3% a year in real terms. Compare that to the Conservative choice of austerity.
I'm Regina Vaidyanathan, live in Westminster. We'll be getting all of the political reaction to the Chancellor's plans, including speaking to the Shadow Chancellor in the next few minutes.
Leaders in Northern Ireland call for peace as 17 officers are injured in a second night of clashes in Ballymena, sparked by the alleged sexual assault of a teenage girl. Los Angeles emerges from a curfew as the US military prepares its response to immigration protests. We're standing by for an update from the National Guard. And in breaking news, the EU and UK agree a deal on the post-Brexit future of Gibraltar. We'll have more on that story for you. I'm Anita McVeigh and you are watching Verified Live. It's a hugely significant day here in the UK as the Chancellor has set out how taxpayers' money will be spent by the government until the end of the decade. We'll have lots of analysis, so let's cross straight to my colleague, Rajini Vaidyanathan, who's in Westminster for us. Rajini.
Yeah, it's been a busy day here in Westminster. As you say, the UK Chancellor Rachel Reeves setting out her spending plans for the coming years. Now, it's important to say that this was not a budget, so there were no tax announcements or anything like that. This is all about allocating money that's already in the system. Now, there have been some winners and losers when it comes to different government departments as she set out those plans for the next decade. So let's get some of the headlines on this. The Chancellor confirmed total departmental spending will grow by 2.3% over inflation per year. Now, the NHS came out as a big winner today. The Chancellor saying that spending on the NHS will rise by 3% a year after inflation. She also confirmed £39 billion for social and affordable housing. Now, we heard a little bit about this in recent weeks, but the Chancellor also committed to a boost in defence spending. She also said she wanted to end asylum hotels in the next 4 years. Well, Rachel Reeves said she was rejecting austerity, which we saw under the Conservative government. Well, our political correspondent Layla Nathu sets out what we heard.
When will we feel better off, Chancellor?
Soon, fingers crossed, is what she's thinking. Rachel Reeves leaving Downing Street this morning for Parliament for a crucial moment in her time in charge of the country's finances.
Yes, he likes it.
Earlier, cabinet ministers met to hear how much money their departments have been allocated for the coming years, both for spending and investment. Some have done better than others. Trade-offs unavoidable with limited room for manoeuvre in economic terms.
I call the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rachel Reeves.
In the Commons this lunchtime, the Chancellor set out her stall.
We are renewing Britain. But I know that too many people in too many parts of our country are yet to feel it. This government's task, my chance, a task as Chancellor, and the purpose of this spending review is to change that, to ensure that renewal is felt in people's everyday lives, in their jobs and on their high streets. The priorities of this spending review are the priorities of working people.
She's giving day-to-day spending across all departments an above-inflation boost and said she was taking a different approach to that of the Tories.
In contrast to our increase of 2.3%, they cut spending by 2.9% per year in 2010. So let's be clear. Austerity was a destructive choice for the fabric of our society.
There are cuts to some departments, including Transport and the Foreign Office, but schools and defence have been given an uplift, and the NHS was the big winner.
This Labour government is making a record cash investment in our National Health Service, increasing real terms day-to-day spending by 3% per year for every single year of this spending review. An extra